weeks
That's
ago.
a hammer.
3 weeks ago.
Missing the nail.
Okay, we're going to begin. Our cinematographers are ready. This is Brian Sargent's area. He's our program director, so feel free to introduce us to you.
So they didn't tell me I was program director when I got volunteered for vice president, so he's over here grinning and laughing.
Fine print.
Yeah, exactly. Me without my glasses. So we've had Hank Cole here before. He spoke about rubber bands and twin pushers. So now we're going from rubber bands for rockets. I think at this point, Fred Terzian knows Hank much better. I'll let him do the rest of the introductions, but further ado.
Well, for those of you who were here earlier, I believe it's Roger Gregory who's known Hank a lot longer than I have. And it turns out that I learned many years later that Hank lived within walking distance of where I lived in Los Altos when I was going to school up there at Foothill College. And if I'd known that, I would have learned about the Oakland Cloud Dusters a lot sooner than I did. But everybody here probably knows of Hank by way of his aero modeling experiences. He's published many articles in Air Trails, many of the model magazines. He's done articles for Frank Zick's yearbooks, that came out in, 1930 something, or maybe even earlier than that. And he's been a Cloud Duster member for as long as I can remember, so I know that he's been involved around here since around 1947, or maybe even earlier than that. But anyway, he's a very gracious person. We've certainly enjoyed having him being a Cloud Duster member. He's also a member of the Academy of Model Aeronautics Hall of Fame, as well as SAM National. And so he's achieved a lot in that area. What we don't know is all of his background with NASA and NACA. So hopefully he'll be able to give us a little bit of an insight as to what has transpired over the last 50, 60 plus years. So without any other introduction, Hank Cole.
Okay.
Well, a few weeks ago, NASA notified me they were going to have some meetings on talking about the 50th anniversary of Apollo. I said, 50 years? Anyway, they said, when you come to this meeting, would you bring any artifacts that you might have from 50 years ago? And it just happened that we tested this model of the Apollo Saturn, and they were going to throw it away when we finished the program, and so I took it home. And this model that you've see in your handout here was about 6 feet high, and I had it in my office for 50 years. And well, I said, well, I guess that's an artifact. So when I went to the meeting, I took this model, and the thing that's unknown about this model, most wind tunnel models are heavy. This is light. You can just lift it like this and walk around with it. And there's a reason for that, which I will tell you later. But anyway, and of course with the twin pusher, the last time I came here, I had something to show you, an artifact. So the best I could do, and the other thing about the Apollo program was everything we did on Apollo, they made it secret or confidential because they didn't want the Russians to find out. Well, heck, the Russians probably knew anyway, but so what I'm going to do here is, I guess you all have a handout, and I'm going to start with, I suppose you know that Neil Armstrong was a model builder, and I don't know, there's a lot of AMA members here, you get model aviation, and this model aviation, that's I made copies on the front page of my handout. And what I'm going to do first is talk a little bit about Neil Armstrong. If you go to the first page of this, it all started with model airplanes. Even after stepping on the moon, he still built model airplanes. And then the article in here, those of you who have read it, you don't have to listen to this one. But he had a younger brother, and I've taken the key things that they have in the article here, where Neil has long passed away, and he had a brother who was 5 years younger, and they asked him these questions. And they asked him first, how many models did he build? And his younger brother said, 1 or 2 a month. And what he did, when he built a model, he built a lot of scale models and everything. He would fly them, and a lot of them were rubber powered. And if they flew good, he would hang them on the ceiling. And if they were not so good, he would light a match to them and throw them out the window. So, the other thing about this was he built a wind tunnel in his basement. And how many have built a wind tunnel in their basement? I don't know. But anyway, his little brother said he blew all the fuses in the house. And the other thing his little brother said was that while he was building the wind tunnel, he kept running out of materials and telling me to go and get some sheet metal and stuff. So apparently Neil had a little brother who was shopping for him, which meant he was such an intense builder that he didn't want to shop himself. He wanted to keep building, and he would send his brother out to get materials. And at 16 years old, he got a student license to fly. And then when he went to college, he joined the AMA, and he flew controlled speed models in contests. And then he enrolled in aeronautical engineering at Purdue. And he did this, he got his aviation work, he was in the Navy program for pilots. So he was called up for the Korean War, and he flew in that. And when that was over, he went back to Purdue and completed his degree. When he graduated, he joined the NACA. You all know what the NACA was. It was the, and I at the same time, roughly just before him, I joined the NACA. And NACA was a committee with the president, under the president, and they didn't have much money. They just had to use the budget that the president got. But the thing they did have was the Air Force, well, it was the Army in those days. The Army and they would donate airplanes to NACA, and NACA had wind tunnels, and they also had test pilots. And the airplanes they donated were flown by the test pilots. And that's how I got to, I had when the Air Force gave the number wing 8 model of the B-47 to NACA, and I was a project engineer on the testing down at Edwards Air Force Base, and that's where Neil Armstrong was a test pilot. And in NACA, if I wanted to go to another lab for something, the pilots on there would fly me. And so they had to keep their expenses down. And I might give you a little idea of what the test pilots did on the B-47. We were studying structural modes of airplanes, and all know about structural modes, I'm sure. You have wing up and down, and you have lateral, but there are all kinds of modes, and that affects the way the airplane performs. And the B-47 was built with very thin wings. They had the fuel tanks and the fuselage, and it had a very high aspect ratio. So at 35,000 feet, the B-47 is faster than any other airplane in the world. And even an F-86 couldn't keep up with a B-47 at high altitude. But at lower altitudes, F-86 could do it. So when we instrumented the B-47, it's probably had more instruments than any other airplane in the world. We had an optograph on top of the fuselage. We had all these strain gauges. We had all. It was unbelievable. And when I flew back to Langley, the test pilots flew me back there, and I walked on this wing. We walked on this wing, and it's so thin that it deflects. You walk on it, and it goes up and down. Of course, there were a couple guys behind me, or in front of me too. But anyway, we're going across this wing, and it's going up and down like that. And the way we ran the test was, the pilots were taken up to, on the stick, we would put a chain with a stop on it. And the pilot would, and we call the stick banging. The pilot would pull it back to the chain and then push it forward. And that would put a pulse into the airplane, and all the modes were excited. And then we measured that, and then I'd take the data back to Ames, and we would really work on the data. But in those days, we didn't have PCs, we didn't have computers. All we had was a IBM mainframe, and we would get we'd put data in and get an overnight result. Well, anyway, that's how I met Neil Armstrong, and I was very impressed with him because he seemed to be very calm all the time, and he was very thoughtful. And if you asked him something, he didn't just give you the answer like that. He would think about it a little bit. And so I think with building models might have been very important to him in concentrating on a little step at a time. Each model he built was a step, and he had to concentrate on it. And I think that helped him. He could act the same way in his test flight. And let's see, where are we here? You probably all remember that what happened when Sputnik came along. Sputnik started the space race, and there were I don't know how to talk about that era. It was just something else. At Ames, there was the Army, and then there was the Air Force, and they all started wanting to put packages in orbit. And there were all these rockets, and you couldn't believe how many rockets there were. And I was invited, when we were doing the wind tunnel test, the main thing we were testing was for transonic buffeting. And that was something that was, some of these rockets would go up and explode in the transonic region. And that's what I want to get into now initially. If you would go to the this page here with the there was one package that the Air Force had which was so highly classified. I'm afraid to even say that. I know the name of it, but I don't think I'll say it. And even 50 years ago. But anyway, in this conference, the first one they fired exploded in 60 seconds in the transonic region. And well, you know, rocket ships in those days were exploding. Then they fired another one that exploded at the same time. And so they asked me what I thought about that. And have any of you ever heard of Galloping Gertie?
Yes.
Okay. There was, yes, I think I was just out of high school when Galloping Gertie, I lived in Tacoma, Washington, and there was a bridge they built across the Narrows there. And it was very narrow and long, and in order to save weight, instead of using a truss to support it, they used they welded sheets of metal on the sides and to take the shear. And they thought they saved a lot of money by doing this. And it happened that a friend of mine, Dad, was working for that, and he was so proud of this bridge. And he took me out on Galloping Gertie. And there was a light breeze blowing, and we started walking across the bridge, and I started feeling it going up and down. And then I looked down at the sidewalk, and I said, where did all those cracks come from? And he didn't say. Anyway, it turned out that one day there was a breeze that stayed steady at 17 miles an hour. And that apparently was a critical flutter speed of that bridge. And the bridge went up and down until it broke up. And so when they start talking, if you look at, you're on the same page, you see this shadow graph here, and it says Mach number 0.95. You see the shock waves up here? Well, where the shock waves are, the flow separates and there's tremendous turbulence. And one of the things they trained the astronauts for that, they put them on a machine and they randomly shook them, and that's how they eliminated a lot of astronauts. Well, I got to thinking about this, and I thought, gee, maybe this is a case of Galloping Gertie. Inside all of this turbulence is a mode which is critical and is actually going to flutter. And so we decided, well, how are we going to test for this shape. Well, by the way, you can see that the shape is kind of messed up by the window frames there. But you can see it's a cone and then a boat tail. And I thought, well, maybe it actually fluttered. So how are we going to test a model, make a model that can measure that inside of all this turbulence and stuff? So I thought, well, what we want to do is make a very light model. So I went over to the model shop and being a model builder, I have some good, a lot of the guys over there were model builders outside of work as well as on their work. And I talked to a man named Virgil Forrest, a friend of mine, and I said, we want to build something very light, and then we will put a spring on it and a damper that is modeled to the full scale. So in other words, the model has a higher frequency, so the ratio on a part of the model to the volume, the velocity, air velocity, is the same on the model as it is on the full scale. Then we also put a hydraulic drive here so that we could oscillate it sinusoidally, and we could measure the damping that way. And incidentally, you can see up above there's the mode shape of the full-scale model, and then we simplified it by having just a rotation point there. And when we, if you go to the next page, this is the damping, aerodynamic damping on the model that occurs here. And sure enough, when we got to 0.8 Mach number, the aerodynamic damping went negative. So it was flutter. This airplane actually, inside all that turbulence, developed flutter and broke up. And that's bad news. And but I wonder, you can see we tried an angle of attack of 1/4 or 1/2, and we got up to 1 degree. And I thought, maybe if we go a little higher angle, we'll see what happens. And what happened was everything cleared up. A lot of the turbulence went down and the buffeting went down. And so we were able to fly this model. This is when it's in the free vibration on just the spring and damper. We flew it supersonic. And then I thought, well, here we are supersonic with this thing. I wonder how fast this motion can start. So we took it down to 0 degrees and went emergency stop. And you'll see the curve below. This curve went up, right up to almost the breaking point of the model. And on the full scale, our model would break around 4 degrees motion. On the full scale, it was only a couple degrees. So we solved that problem. Now if we'll go over here to the next page. We not only we did that, but Charles Coe, he put pressure cells on panels, and we had all this data, and I was invited to give a talk to the Air Force on all of this data that we had. And so I reported on this the model I just talked about, and how it had cleared up when we went to an angle attack. And so, let me have a little. And this conference was secret. I have no, there were a lot of stuff on rocket vehicles. And lo and behold, a little time later, Werner von Braun called Smith J.D. France and asked if we could apply our methods to their configuration. So apparently there were some German engineers in this Air Force meeting. And are you on the page where you see the model of the Apollo? Okay. It turned out that in second bending mode, there was a node right at the base of the rocket. Let's go here. There was a node here at the base of the rocket truss here. And then, of course, we also had at the other node line back here, the rear one, we gave that the same treatment as the model I talked about before, the Air Force model, which was just something like that. And we got to thinking, how can we make a model which will, when it deflects down here in the main part, have the tower go the opposite way. That's the second bending mode. And fortunately, I just noticed this today. I was looking at this enlarged picture of the model here. I couldn't remember just how we did that, and then I noticed, if you look, this is a model which broke in the chest, and we lost the fiberglass covering there. You see a rod that goes right up there?
Yeah.
Inside? Well, what we had weighed at the time, that's 50 years ago, what we did was there was a lever at the base of the tower, and the tower had flexures here so it could rock back and forth. And then we put from the end of the sting, see, this is mounted on a sting in the wind tunnel. We put a rod in there, and it was attached to this lever. So when this part goes down, that part goes up. And we were able to simulate the second bending mode on our model. And that's what we tested for Saturn. And there was a, so that's what we told Von Braun, sure we can do it. And he sent us two configurations that they had in Heal. I'll explain to you what the way this thing works. When you're on the pad and you start up, if there's a breakdown, the pilot here fires explosive bolts and releases the capsule up here. Then they fire this rocket, and it pulls away from the main rocket. But this has the capsule has the parachutes and everything, so you got to get up pretty high before you and use a parachute. And they had a simulator that tested the pilots whether they actually had to fly this thing. And the way this thing was rigged, up in the very nose of this rocket, they had some chemical thrusters, they call them. And I never could figure out how those work. But apparently, the pilot, when he releases here, has control of these thrusters, and he can change the direction that they're going. So they would go up to maybe 5,000 feet, and then release the parachutes and be saved. Okay, so we had this these two configurations, and as you will see here on I have the results here. Well, anyway, one of the configuration they ended up using was okay, but the other configuration, they had put a plate at the base of this rocket here, so it was easier for the pilots to fly. They were testing it in simulators, and it was easier for the pilots to fly, and they were going to go with that. But when we tested it not only had flutter transonically, but also at the Mach number was Mach number 1.5, which is maximum dynamic pressure, and that's one place you don't want to have unstable conditions. So Al Erickson and I, he was my boss at Ames, we flew down to Houston, and we met with all of these German scientists, and their air conditioning was out. And we were flying on C-47 by test pilots, and we did this all in one day. We went to Houston, and we went in a place with no air conditioning in Houston in the summer. And my boss, the thing I remember about the meeting was my boss's glasses were all frosted up. But anyway, we told them the bad news, and they ended up using the one. But I feel very strongly that if they had used the one they were going with, it would have blown up. It wouldn't have blown up on the Apollo 11, though it would have blown up on one of the earlier ones. And then they would have delayed the program, and maybe they wouldn't have got on the moon when they did. But anyway, we felt good that we had done something for them. Where are we here? That pretty much tells you what we did. And it's only one small thing. Can you imagine? That whole thing weighed 7 million pounds. And at takeoff it had about 9 million pounds thrust. And all that stuff worked and go up there, and it's just amazing. And of course, you know, Apollo 13, it could have happened, but Neil's program went well. But one thing I wanted to say about the whole thing was that von Braun initially had the idea that he wanted to build a rocket vehicle that would take off and land on the moon and then come back and land on the Earth. And then they thought, well, you can't get enough fuel in one rocket to do that. So we'll go up into orbit and we'll assemble a bigger rocket up in orbit. And then we'll go to the moon. Well, they'd still be working on that if they had done that. But a friend of mine, named John Hubel, at Langley, I guess, we were in a lot of competition with Langley, but I had friends back there, and he's the one that pushed this, and they finally talked Von Braun into doing the thing with the way they did. And at the time, that was before they did any rendezvous docking. And if you'll see in here, they had a project called Gemini, in which they ran it for 5 days. I think there were Agena 3s, and Neil was the one who docked Gemini. He was the first guy to dock 2 ships in space. And it's, let's see, so, and then the other thing was, one Gemini not only proved that they could keep astronauts alive and everything for 4 or 5 days, they also learned they could dock vehicles, and so they ended up going with what they did, where they had inside this 3rd stage, they had the lunar excursion model, and Neil Armstrong was the one that they had a test vehicle to test that before they built the final one. And when he tested it, it went wild, and he ejected and barely escaped out of that test on that. But, and as you know, when they did go to the moon, I'm going to just end this pretty much here. If you watch the thing on television, that's where I got this. Just as they were coming down to the moon, the last stages, Neil looked down and saw they were going to land him on a bunch of rocks. So he had to move away from that area, and he was using up fuel. And when he finally did land on the area, he only had about 30 or 40 seconds left of fuel. Otherwise, they would have had to abort or leave him on the moon. And, well, I'm open to see questions.
One of the things that you mentioned was the fact when they did the very first docking, when Armstrong did the first docking,
Yeah.
is that he found out that he was in the command module and it was tumbling.
You always hear about pilots flying by the seat of their pants. Well, when you're in space, you're floating.
Floating by the seat of your pants.
You can't fly by the seat of your pants. Well, Neil was apparently very good at looking at his attitude instruments. And he noticed as he was approaching the docking that he's rotating. And if it's dark outside and you can't see the vehicle you're approaching, you don't know that you're doing this. The only way you can know it is you have to look at your instruments. And Neil was good at that.
He was able to straighten it out
Yeah.
and save the docking.
Yeah.
Question. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. My experience with the program is that NASA aims with the shuttle. And every time in the flight profile they get up to a certain speed and then they run into the, I suppose it's the same effect you're talking about here. That throttle back, coast through and then throttle up, right? Is that the same effect that you've been talking about?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Throttle back.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with that one there, but you're flying, when you're out in space, you're flying, you have no gravity, and you're just flying by what you see on the,
No, I'm talking about the liftoff.
oh, liftoff.
When they launch, they get to a certain altitude and a certain speed, and they're tilting over, and they throttle back to go to the transonic region, I guess.
Oh, yeah, yeah, what they did with Apollo, let's see, remember I told you that I left it out on the Apollo instrument, but we tried that at an angle of attack, going through a transonic region.
Right.
But we couldn't do it with the one configuration, but the configuration I used, if you put it at an angle of attack, you could go through the transonic without slowing down. But the space shuttle, that's a different,
But I know every shuttle, because working with the program,
but they slowed down going through the
Yeah.
transonic region.
yeah, then they throttle back up when they get to the other side.
Well, maybe theirs didn't work on any of the
I don't, I was just trying to.
Yeah,
that-
you know, that was, you know, I think that's the case, because, see, the configuration we had to reject had Mach number of 1.5.
Right,
It very bad, it was unstable.
right.
And you know, there's buffeting from turbulence, but when you go unstable, you break up.
The program I worked on was Space Lab 3. I was a data systems manager for NASA. We would find monkeys and rats on that flight, and a thing called the RAT, the Remote Animal Handling Facility, their habitat for the animals. And the monkeys, squirrel monkeys, are instrumented with probes, deep body temperature, EKGs, and all this other stuff, and that stuff was coming down. And we were receiving, you know that on building 240, there's a 46-foot dish up there? Anyway, we were using that and we were getting the data directly to Ames. And I built a little MCC, Mission Control Complex there at Ames. And we were getting all our data right there and recording everything for the 15 days that they were flying.
But that's such a complicated configuration, I don't think you could build a model.
Well, they tested, the test facility, we tested the RAF in our facility and then sent it down to Houston, down to Cape rather, to be loaded aboard the Challenger. So we were a successful flight on the Challenger, the next flight was not successful. You know that one. It blew up. I lost a friend on that.
Tom, you have a question?
Yeah, Walt, I wanted to ask Henry a question. When you were talking about the launch angle for the Apollo 11, based on your studies, what was the launch angle that they were looking at that was giving you the buffeting effect? What launch angle did your studies tell the launch folks what angle to launch at?
What do you mean?
Yeah, what incident?
The one that went through the
The one,
transom?
yeah, when
It was
successful.
5 degrees.
It was 5 degrees
Wow.
rather than.
Wow.
Well, now, I don't know exactly what, somebody told me that they did do that in their real flights. I don't know. Is there a movie on it where there's a movie out on that where the person I saw that saw a movie said they did that when they went through transonic.
Oh, that at that point in time, they adjusted incidence, and then in other words, when they went transonics, or Mach 1 or Mach 1.5, they could adjust the incidence by just adjusting the pivot angle on the engine slightly. And they could change the incidence of the rocket, and then straighten it out again as soon as they got past the high load point.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But they had no way to turn the rockets down on Apollo. They could not throttle the rockets on Apollo. They were either on or they were off. And they ran them out, basically. I don't think they ever,
Well, are you talking about the thrusters on top?
no, I'm talking about the main engines.
The main engine,
Yeah, when they're going out, okay? I don't think they had any throttle controls on those, I think they just rode that horse into space and, yeah, well, it was going, it was either going or it wasn't going. It wasn't anything in between. Yeah. So, but unlike the shuttles, engines, not the solid boosters, but the shuttle engines themselves could be adjusted. Okay?
Oh, so
They
they
actually
have
have
throttle.
That's what I was talking about, throttling, not going through.
You can throttle, or you couldn't throttle a
That was a
throttle.
good.
We have another question here in the back.
Yeah, I want to ask a question. While you were talking, I was going through Wikipedia here. I don't know if you realize, Boeing has built 2,032 B-47 before it retired. 2,000 airplanes. This is not a little Piper gun.
No.
This is a big airplane. You know that.
Well, those are Sac Bombers, and I don't think we ever heard when they.
Well, it's right here. But I have a question for you.
They have
You
a
were
thin
saying-
wing.
You said something about the wings, when they went up
How
and
much they
down,
would flex.
they didn't twist.
No.
That's an interesting design.
Well, when I said didn't twist, see, it depend, they did twist some, but not at the frequency of the bending.
Oh,
See, what happens in flutter, when your wings go up and down like this, the wings do twist, but if they stay in phase with the motion, then they don't
They just keep.
drive it. But if it get out of phase with the motion, then it drives the thing, and then it will just increase until it breaks.
so now when you make a turn, let's say a slow one, 20, 30 degrees, if you exceed to 45, you may lose a wing, because one flutter will generate the other one, or accelerate the other one. So you will get a twist, but that's not the question I have. The question is, what was the airplane, the wing was very thin.
Yeah.
What was the design of that wing? Because there was no capacity design.
It was designed by Boeing, I have no idea. I don't know what the airfoil was, but I know it was very thin and very flexible.
Well, Hank, you had mentioned,
But birds fly with flexible wings.
yeah, you had mentioned that aileron effect, you know, where the, on the early models of the B-47, where if you deflected the aileron in a particular direction, the wing would twist opposite that,
Opposite direction.
Oh,
creating a problem with-
Aileron reversal?
yes, yeah.
Yeah, that's the big story on the B-47 when it first came out. They were gonna have a show for all the generals, and down at Edwards, they had a big stand with all these people in it. And the pilot was told to come down and fly in front of the reviewing stand and then climb away. And he came down and he got a little too much speed. So he had aileron reversal, so instead of going away, his airplane went over and the wingtip just missed the top of the review stand. So,
I bet they were excited.
Are there any other questions? Any other questions?
That was on purpose.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hank.
Thank you, Hank.
Well, Hank, I want to thank you very much, and thanks to the club on your presentation. It's now the second one. You gave me this appreciation, I can give you this plaque from Sam 21. Thank you very much.
oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
I'll put that with my twin pusher.
Okay.
Third presentation was the time.
I have a question for you, Hank. It's a stupid question probably, but,
We have a question down here.
so, I'm wondering what the Ames research and the NASA program, what did Ames research do in conjunction with the NASA program? When they would call up Ames research, what were they looking for from you. Was it, because our visit to NASA was very interesting. But there were all these engineers and aeronautical engineers and all kinds of engineers. But I'm wondering what the relationship between Ames Research and NASA is today and what it was then. Where you would work together on certain kinds of things.
Well, NASA was, everything was contracted, or, you know, it's like I said, Von Braun called Smith J. de France, and then he told us to try it. And Langley built some models, but see, there's a problem I didn't mention. There's another, when you try to represent a full-scale airplane, there's Reynolds number. But when you get up to speed of sound, the Mach number is more important, and the Reynolds number doesn't count. But if you try to build a full-scale model of, it's so small that the Reynolds number goes down, and you cannot measure these flutter conditions. See, you might think of a lightweight model as being a great big pressure cell that it measures all of the results of everything on it. And you can tell whether you've got flutter or not by the damping. And the damping and aerodynamic damping goes negative, you move, you in a mode and you get larger and larger. That's flutter. That's galloping Gertie.
Hey, Brian Chang, didn't you do some work on that in helicopter blades? Same sort of thing. He's another nasty guy.
Sorry, I'm an Army guy.
Well,
Never
you were
worked
there.
out.
Well, I should say, see, we had a lot of, in conversation, see, the John Hubel who decided on how to dock and do the way they did it, he and I were on the Structural Dynamics Committee, and every year we would get together and we would discuss these things all together. So in a way, the engineers are talking to each other, and the management doesn't know what we're doing. But you can't get the money to do it unless the management agrees.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the problem.
Oh, we have another question over here.
Something I always wondered about, on a T-51 Mustang, if they really put the pedal to the metal, I understand the tips of the propeller blades go supersonic. What's the effect when that happens? On a big Merlin engine with a four-bladed prop,
Yeah,
on a P-51 Mustang, when they go to full power for takeoff and stuff like that, or whenever they need it, they make a lot more noise, and that the actual tips of the propeller blades are supersonic at that point. How does it affect the thrust, and how does it affect the propeller and the airplane as a whole?
well, I say it'd be shaking a lot of stuff on that airplane.
A lot of more vibration.
Yeah, vibration.
But other than that, you would just lose lift at the tips?
Any time you go transonic,
Okay. You just gotta expect a lot more.
yeah. Actually, what they did on the rocket vehicles, you notice this one that fluttered had a boat tail.
Mm-hmm.
They found the best thing to do, instead of having a boat tail here, is to just cut it off and go straight.
Ah, interesting.
And so the flow doesn't, see, what's
So
happening.
the flow
here-
doesn't touch the
What's
surface
happening
as
here
much,
is the shock wave starts moving back and forth, and
and it's right against the surface.
it's out of phase with the motion. So that all of these pressures on these boat tail are pushing out of sync with the motor. And so that's driving.
So if you have cleaner flow
But
separation, you don't get the pressure.
if you took this shape here and brought it straight back and then just cut it off, you would get a lot of turbulence back here, but you wouldn't.
You would get turbulence in the front.
See, that's,
Mm.
it wouldn't move over a large surface, changing the pressures. And that's pretty much what they do nowadays on a lot of rockets, that they just 90 degrees.
Any other questions? I want to thank all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And what did you say about
Third time's a charm.
it?
You may get another invitation.
You may get another invitation because our secretary said your third time is the charm.
Question about you.
Yeah. Oh, I want to thank Brian Chan for preparing the certificate.
I never thought I would talk to a model called my friend.
The meeting is adjourned. I want to thank
Explain to
everybody
me
for
that,
coming here. We got
It's part of
started early.
NASA.
We adjourned.
I didn't.
Meeting's over.
Very, very